"She's nobody, just my soon-to-be ex-wife. Keep moving." Adrian Whitmore said those words out loud, loud enough for the nurses at the front desk to hear, while his hand was wrapped around Camilla's waist inside Cedar Valley Medical Center. He actually laughed after he said it. Laughed. His wedding ring still on his finger, his wife's name still listed as his emergency contact in every hospital database in the city. Then the emergency bay doors detonated open 20 feet away, and a gurney came through so fast it nearly clipped the wall, and on that gurney, barely conscious, bleeding at the temple, was Vivian. The nobody, the soon-to-be ex-wife, the woman who had just broken 3 ribs, saving a stranger's life. If you're new here, please subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Adrian Whitmore had a habit that his business partners admired and his enemies feared. He never hesitated. Not when he signed a $200 million acquisition at 32 years old. Not when he fired a board member who questioned his vision. Not when he stood at the window of his 43rd floor penthouse in downtown Chicago and looked out at a city he genuinely believed he had conquered. Hesitation in Adrian's world was a disease that other men suffered from, not him. He moved fast, decided faster, and apologized to no one. That was the version of himself he had sold to the world for 15 years. The version that made magazine covers. The version that gave keynote speeches about disruption and innovation, and the courage it took to build something from nothing. The version that people in expensive suits nodded at in boardrooms, while quietly wondering how one man could be so completely sure of himself at all times. But there was a version of Adrian Whitmore that those people never saw. The version that woke up at 3 in the morning and stared at the ceiling. The version that poured a second glass of scotch before the first one was finished. The version that somewhere deep in a place he refused to examine knew exactly what he had done and chose to keep moving anyway. Because if you move fast enough, you never have to look at what you left behind. That was the logic anyway. It had worked for a while. Camilla Rhodes was 29 years old and genuinely beautiful in the way that made people in restaurants turn their heads. She had come to work at Whitmore Dynamics 18 months ago as an executive assistant recommended by a placement firm that specialized in finding exactly the kind of intelligent, polished, quietly ambitious young professionals that billionaires like to keep close. She was good at her job. Excellent, actually. She remembered details. She anticipated needs before they were spoken. She had a laugh that filled a room without being too loud, and she knew how to make a man feel important in the specific way that involved listening to him talk about himself and asking exactly the right follow-up questions. Adrian had noticed her within the first 2 weeks. He told himself it was professional admiration. He told himself that for about 4 months, until he stopped telling himself anything at all and simply acted. That was very Adrian. Their relationship, if you could call it that, with any seriousness, had been developing in the particular underground way that these things develop when one person has enormous power and the other person is trying to figure out what exactly she has gotten herself into. Camilla was not stupid. She knew he was married. She knew about Vivian. But she had allowed herself to believe the story Adrian told. And Adrian was a very compelling storyteller. She changed, he told Camilla one evening 4 months into whatever they were to each other. They were sitting on the terrace of a restaurant so expensive it didn't have a menu, just a chef who brought things. She used to understand me. Now it's like talking to someone who speaks a different language. Camilla had nodded thoughtfully. People grow apart, she said. It doesn't mean anyone's at fault. Exactly. Adrian had pointed at her like she had just correctly identified the solution to a complex equation. Exactly that. No one's fault. Just life. He believed that. Or he made himself believe it, because the alternative that he had simply become someone who no longer deserved the person waiting for him at home was not a story Adrian Whitmore was capable of living inside. The night everything changed began unremarkably. Camilla had been complaining for 3 days about headaches and what she described as a pressure behind my eyes that won't go away. Adrian, who responded to the people around him with the immediate decisiveness he applied to everything, announced that she would see a specialist that evening. Not tomorrow, tonight. He called ahead to Cedar Valley Medical Center, specifically to the neurology department. He knew the department head, a quiet, serious man named Dr. Ellison, who had once been a guest at one of Adrian's foundation dinners, and who owed him in the vague but real way that people in power always accumulated debts from one another, a certain professional courtesy. It was arranged within 40 minutes. That was the kind of man Adrian was. Problems got solved. Doors opened. The world reorganized itself around his timeline because he had spent 15 years making sure it would. They arrived at Cedar Valley at 7:43 in the evening. Adrian held the door for Camilla, and his hand found the small of her back as they moved into the lobby, a gesture so automatic it barely registered as conscious action. He was already on his phone with his assistant back at the office, reviewing quarterly numbers for a board presentation 3 days away. "The North Tower acquisition needs the environmental assessment before Thursday," he was saying. "I don't care what Morrison's timeline says. Thursday." Camilla walked beside him slightly ahead, looking at the hospital lobby with the particular expression people wear when they are in a place that is both clinical and quietly frightening. She hated hospitals. Her mother had died in a hospital when Camilla was 16. She had the specific kind of anxiety that came from that. The smell of antiseptic, the sound of wheels on linoleum, the careful professional voices of people who were trained not to let you hear what they were actually feeling. "You okay?" Adrian asked, ending his call with the efficiency of a man who was never fully in any single place. "Fine," she said. "Just Dr. Ellison is excellent, top 3 in the country for his specialty." He said it the way he said most things as a fact that was also supposed to be comfort, as if Camilla's anxiety about hospitals could be resolved by ranking systems. She smiled at him. Not a real smile, the other kind. He didn't notice the difference. The lobby of Cedar Valley Medical Center at night had a particular quality. During the day, it was organized chaos, families moving in every direction, volunteers at information desks, children who were frightened, and old people who were resigned, and young people who looked like they couldn't quite believe they were somewhere so serious. During the day, the noise managed itself. At night, it was different. At night, the lobby became what hospitals actually were. The light was the same, but the sounds changed. There was a stillness underneath everything that wasn't calm. It was vigilance, the kind of quiet that exists when the people around you are paying very careful attention to things you cannot see. Adrian didn't feel any of that. He was looking at his phone, nodding toward the reception desk, preparing to announce himself in the way powerful men announce themselves, not loudly, but with a confidence that suggested the entire mechanism of the institution should immediately orient toward his needs. He was about to speak when the doors to his left opened. Not the main entrance. The emergency bay doors. The ones that are supposed to stay closed unless something is happening. They crashed open with the particular violence of organized urgency, and a team of people moved through them with a speed that cut through the lobby like a current through still water. A gurney, someone on it, medical personnel on both sides, one already squeezing a bag above the patient's face, another holding a chart and calling out numbers that Adrian's brain received as noise because he wasn't listening. He wasn't listening because he was looking at the patient on the gurney. And the world, all of it, the numbers and the board presentation, and Camilla beside him, and the 43 floors, and the 200 million, and the magazine covers, and the keynote speeches, and the story he told himself about who he was, all of it simply stopped, because the woman on the gurney was Vivian, his wife. He would try later to describe what happened in his body at that moment. He couldn't, not fully. The closest he could get was this. It was like the moment before a car crash when you see what's coming and your foot is already pressing the brake, but you know with the absolute certainty of physics that it is not going to be enough. That fraction of a second between understanding what is happening and being unable to stop it. That, stretched out over what felt like years. Vivian. She was ashen in the way that people are ashen when the blood has decided it has more important things to do than make your face look like itself. Her hair was loose, and there was something he couldn't identify, it didn't want to, at her temple. Her hands, visible above the edge of the gurney blanket, were the hands he had held 1,000 times and stopped holding for reasons he had convinced himself were legitimate. She was conscious. That was the thing that broke something in Adrian's chest, in a way that unconsciousness wouldn't have. She was conscious, and her eyes were open, and she was looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone who is choosing very deliberately to remain calm. Vivian had always known how to remain calm. He had admired that once. Later he had resented it because her calm had made him feel like his urgency, his fire, his drive, his relentless need to move and decide and achieve was somehow excessive, somehow wrong. He understood, watching her being wheeled past him on a gurney, that she hadn't been making him feel wrong. She had simply been demonstrating what strength actually looked like. "Vivian." He said it before he thought about saying it, before he thought about anything. Just the word, her name, in a voice he didn't recognize as his own, because it was the voice of someone who was terrified, and Adrian Whitmore was not supposed to be terrified of anything. Camilla turned to look at him. The change in his face told her everything. "Adrian," she said carefully. "That's my wife." The words came out flat, not emotional, just true in the way that facts are true without ornament. Camilla went very still. "Sir, you need to step back, sir." One of the nurses, a young woman with short hair and the particular professional authority of someone who handled chaos for a living, put her hand up as Adrian moved toward the gurney. "That's my wife," he said again, louder this time. "Sir, she's going into trauma care. I need to know what happened to her." I wasn't shouting, but his voice had the weight of a man who had spent 15 years making rooms rearrange themselves around his requirements, and even in his current state, cracked open, barely functional, nothing like himself, that weight was present. The nurse matched it. "Sir, are you family?" 3 words. 3 of the most complicated words Adrian Whitmore had ever been asked. He opened his mouth, and nothing came. Because the question was so simple, and the answer was so complicated, that they couldn't exist in the same sentence. Was he family? Legally, yes. The divorce proceedings were in progress, but the papers weren't signed. There was no legal finality yet. But in every way that actually mattered, the way you are family, when you are truly present in someone's life, when you know the small things about them, when you are the person they would call in the middle of the night if something went wrong. He had left that behind. He had chosen to leave it. "Yes," he said finally, "I'm her husband." The word felt foreign, like a language he used to speak. The waiting area outside the trauma department was a narrow corridor with chairs bolted to the wall and a water cooler that made a noise every 40 seconds. Adrian sat in one of those chairs with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. He had not looked at his phone in 11 minutes. That had not happened in years. Camilla sat 4 chairs away from him. The distance had been wordless, a mutual understanding that what had just happened required space that neither of them knew how to measure. She was looking at the floor. He was looking at nothing. The nurse had given him minimal information. Vivian had been brought in after an incident at the Harmon Foundation charity event held at the Beaumont Hotel, 3 miles away. There had been an accident, something about a scaffolding collapse in one of the event spaces, a panic, people falling. Vivian had been there. She had intervened when an elderly man had fallen and was in danger of being crushed in the stampede. She had pushed him out of the way and taken the force of what came next. Adrian listened to this information with the particular stillness of someone receiving something they don't fully understand yet, because the full understanding would require them to completely rearrange how they have been thinking about everything. Because Vivian hadn't been at the Harmon Foundation charity event as a guest. The nurse had mentioned almost as an aside that Mrs. Caldwell had been volunteering there, that she was in fact the coordinator who had organized the evening's program. Volunteering, coordinating, working, quietly, without announcement, without putting her name on anything, and this was the part that was starting to open something in Adrian's chest, like a cold hand reaching through his ribs, without asking for anything from anyone. While he had been photographed at 3 separate public events in the past 4 months with Camilla on his arm, while he had given interviews about his new chapter, while he had told people with the rehearsed casualness of a man who has practiced the line that Vivian and I grew apart, but we both want what's best for each other. She had been volunteering at charity events and saving old men from stampedes. He pressed his hands harder against his face. "Can I ask you something?" Camilla's voice was different. The warmth that she usually applied to speaking to him, the particular warmth that was professional and genuine, and also he understood now in a way he hadn't before somewhat performed, was gone. What was underneath it was more honest, quieter. "Go ahead," Adrian said, not looking up. "How long has she been volunteering doing this kind of work?" A pause. "I don't know." "You don't know." It wasn't a question. It was a statement with a question inside it, and the question was enormous. Adrian finally looked up. He looked at Camilla across the 4 chairs between them. This woman he had reorganized his life around, and he tried to find something in her expression that would make the next few minutes easier. He didn't find it. "I didn't know she was doing this," he said. "She didn't tell you. We don't exactly." He stopped, started again. "Communication has been limited." "She didn't tell anyone," Camilla said, not accusingly, just noting it. The way you note a fact that changes the picture of something you thought you understood. The nurse said she's been doing this for almost 2 years, that she built the volunteer program from nothing, that she raised almost $500,000 through a foundation she started with her own savings. Adrian stared at her. "How do you know all of that?" "I went and talked to the nurse while you were on the phone with Morrison." A pause. "You didn't notice?" He hadn't. Of course he hadn't. He was on the phone with Morrison about an environmental assessment. He put his hands back over his face. The worst part about the waiting was that it gave him nowhere to go. Adrian Whitmore's entire life was built around forward motion, action, decision. The next thing. There was always a next thing, always a move to make, always something to solve with the right application of money, or intelligence, or sheer relentless will. Waiting had no room for any of that. Waiting just left you with yourself. And himself was a place Adrian had been very carefully not going for a long time. So the thoughts came because there was nothing to stop them. The memory of Vivian at 31 sitting across from him at the kitchen table of the apartment they couldn't really afford yet, spreadsheet open on her laptop going through his company's finances, with the focused precision of a woman who understood both numbers and stakes, saying, "Okay, here's where we cut. It's not forever just until the Series B closes." They had eaten rice and beans for 6 weeks. She hadn't complained once. The memory of Vivian at 34 after the acquisition that changed everything. The one that turned Whitmore Dynamics from a promising startup into a real company with real weight standing in their new apartment. The one with the view looking out at Chicago spread below them and turning to him with tears on her face. Not sad tears, the other kind. "You did it," she had said. "Not we. You." Because that was Vivian. She never took credit for herself. He had put his arm around her and felt like the most complete version of himself that existed. And then, the years that followed, the growth, the success, each new thing larger than the last, and him moving faster with each one needing more, wanting more, always looking forward, always building. Until one day he looked at his life and realized that Vivian had somehow stopped being part of the forward motion and had become, in the story he was telling himself, part of what he was moving away from. She hadn't changed. That was the thing. That was the thing sitting in the plastic chair in the corridor outside the trauma department at Cedar Valley Medical Center. That was the thing cracking open like ice in spring. She hadn't changed. He had. "Mr. Whitmore." He looked up. A doctor, 50s. The particular kind of tired that comes from competence rather than confusion. Someone who had done this long enough to know exactly what the doing required. "I'm Dr. Hargrove. I'm heading the trauma team with your wife." Adrian was on his feet before the sentence finished. "How is she?" "She's stable." He let that land for a second before continuing. "She has a fractured collarbone, 2 cracked ribs, and significant bruising along her left side. She also sustained a laceration at her temple that required stitches." Adrian closed his eyes for a moment. "She's going to be okay." "Barring complications, yes. She's resilient." A pause. Dr. Hargrove looked at him with the professional blankness of someone who had learned over decades to make no assumptions about the people in front of him. "She's asking not to have visitors right now. She's aware you're here." The sentence was a small explosion. "She knows I'm here, and she doesn't want to see me." "Right," Adrian said. His voice was absolutely even. "Of course." He sat back down. Dr. Hargrove said something about updates and left. Camilla was watching him. "She doesn't want to see you," she said. Not cruel, just clear. "No." "That must be—" Camilla stopped herself. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He looked at the floor. "She's right." Somewhere around 9:30, a woman arrived. She was in her early 60s, small with white hair and the no-nonsense bearing of someone who had spent decades not accepting the world's excuses. She walked directly to the nurse's station, exchanged a few words, and was immediately taken toward Vivian's room. Adrian watched her go. "That's Margaret Chen," Camilla said quietly. "I looked her up. She runs the Harmon Foundation, one of the oldest charitable organizations in Chicago." "How do you know that's her?" "Because 3 different hospital staff members greeted her by name when she walked in." Camilla glanced at him. People know her here, the way people know someone who comes often, who does consistent work. The implication was present without being stated. Adrian had come to this hospital once 14 months ago for a ribbon-cutting ceremony on a new wing he had partially funded. His name was on a plaque near the entrance. Vivian apparently came regularly. Without a plaque. He thought about that. He thought about it for a long time. Around 11, he heard footsteps and looked up. Margaret Chen was walking toward him. She stopped in front of him, looked at him the way that older women sometimes look at men who have disappointed the world, not with anger exactly, but with a specific kind of tired disappointment that is somehow more cutting than anger, and said, "You're the husband." "Yes, ma'am." She sat down, not beside him, 2 chairs over. The distance was deliberate. "She asked me to come out and speak with you," Margaret said, "because she doesn't want to see you herself tonight, not because she's angry. She said to make sure I told you that. She's not angry." Something about that made Adrian's throat tighten in a way that anger would not have. "She said to tell you she's going to be fine and that you shouldn't—" Margaret stopped, seeming to choose her words with care. "She said you shouldn't feel obligated to stay." "I'm not going anywhere," Adrian said immediately. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. "She'll be glad to hear that," she said finally. Then she stood, adjusted her jacket, and fixed him with a look that contained approximately 40 years of watching people make mistakes and live with them. "She's a remarkable woman, your wife. I've known a lot of remarkable people in my life. She's in the top handful." A pause. "Whatever happened between you, and it's none of my business. What happened? I hope you understand what you have, or had, or—" She tilted her head slightly. "Whatever tense applies." She left before he could respond. He sat with that for a long time. Camilla came and sat beside him around midnight. She didn't say anything at first. They sat in the particular silence of 2 people who have been pretending something that has just become impossible to pretend. "I think I need to tell you something," she said finally. "Okay. I don't think I understood. I mean, I knew you were married. I knew there was a separation. I knew all of that." She was choosing her words carefully, the way intelligent people do when they are trying to be honest about something that is uncomfortable. "But I constructed a version of it in my mind, a version where she was just a chapter that was ending, a chapter that was already over." Adrian didn't say anything. "Sitting here tonight," Camilla continued, "I think maybe I needed to believe that version, because the alternative that there was a real woman who had really built a real life alongside you for real years, and that life was—" She stopped. It was easier to think of her as a concept than as a person. "She's not a concept," Adrian said. His voice was low. "No." A pause. "I know that now." Another pause. "I think part of me knew it before. I just didn't let myself look at it." He looked at her. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time in months. Not as the solution to something, not as the new chapter. Not as the proof that he was still someone who could attract that kind of attention. Just as a person who was 29 and smart and in a situation that was more complicated than she had let herself acknowledge. "I'm sorry," he said. He exhaled. "That's on me, not you. I told you a story, and it was the wrong story." Camilla nodded slowly. "What was the right story?" He was quiet for a moment. "That I got scared," he said. "That the closer we got to having everything, the more terrified I got of losing it. So I convinced myself I needed something different, something that didn't come with the same stakes." He shook his head, running away dressed up as moving forward. Camilla absorbed that. "That's a very honest thing to say." "Bit late for it." She didn't disagree. At 1:47 in the morning, a nurse came to tell Adrian that Vivian had been moved to a room and was resting, that she was in stable condition, that visiting hours began at 8, and then almost as an afterthought, she asked me to give you this, a folded piece of paper, hospital note paper, the kind with the Cedar Valley logo at the top. Adrian took it. He didn't open it immediately. He held it for almost a minute, looking at his own name in Vivian's handwriting on the outside of the fold. Her handwriting had always been the same, precise and clear, the handwriting of someone who meant what she wrote. He opened it. There were 6 words that were not a question, not a demand, not an accusation, just a fact. written in that precise, clear handwriting he had been looking at for 15 years. One day you will understand why. He read it 3 times, and then he sat in that plastic chair in the hallway outside the trauma wing of Cedar Valley Medical Center in the city. He believed he had conquered, and he finally, for the first time in a very long time, let himself feel the full weight of what he had done. Not the business version of it, not the narrative version he had constructed for his social circle, not the justification or the rationalization or the carefully managed emotional distance, the real version, the one that had been waiting in that note, the one that had been waiting in Vivian's calm, the one that had been waiting in that corridor with the bolted chairs and the water cooler that made a noise every 40 seconds for him to finally stop moving long enough to let it catch up with him. He sat with it. He didn't try to solve it. He just sat with it. And outside Chicago went on being Chicago, enormous and indifferent, full of people making choices they would have to live with. And one man, for the first time in 15 years, starting to understand the difference between the life he had built and the life he had actually had. The note was still in his hand when morning came. Adrian hadn't slept. He hadn't even tried. He'd sat in that plastic chair through the small hours of the night, watching the corridor change around him, the late-night nurses cycling through their rounds, the fluorescent lights doing what fluorescent lights always do, which is make every human being look slightly more fragile than they actually are, and the water cooler making its noise every 40 seconds, like a small mechanical heart that refused to stop. Camilla had left around 2 in the morning. She hadn't made a scene. That wasn't her style, or at least the Camilla that existed on this side of tonight wasn't the kind of person who made scenes. She had stood up, put on her coat, and looked at him for a long moment, with an expression he couldn't fully read and wasn't sure he deserved to. "I'm going to take a car home," she said. "Okay. I think—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "I think we both need to think about some things." "Yes." She had nodded once, like a period at the end of a sentence, and walked toward the exit. He watched her go. He noticed for the first time that she walked like someone who was very conscious of being watched. Shoulders back, chin level, deliberate. He had found that attractive, once the confidence of it. Now it just looked like armor, the kind people wear when they have learned at some point that the world is the kind of place that requires it. The door closed behind her. And Adrian was alone with a plastic chair and a water cooler and a 6-word note from the woman he had destroyed, and the particular silence of a hospital at 3 in the morning, which is the kind of silence that has seen too much to bother lying to you. He read the note again. "One day you will understand why." He folded it, put it in his jacket pocket, against his chest, and then he waited for morning, the way people wait for things they are not sure they deserve without any right to be there and unable to leave. 8 o'clock arrived with a shift change and the noise of the day beginning, carts moving, voices rising to their daytime register, families starting to appear with the particular exhausted hope of people who spent the night somewhere else worrying and have now arrived to see for themselves. Adrian stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked to the nurse's station. "Vivian Caldwell," he said. "Room number." The nurse, different from the night before, younger, with the fresh shift energy of someone who hadn't yet been worn down by the day, looked at her screen and then looked at him. "Are you family?" Again, that question. "I'm her husband," he said. The word still felt foreign, but he said it anyway. "Room 412, the nurse said. "She has a visitor already. I'll need to check if she's accepting." "It's fine," Adrian said. "I'll wait outside the door." He walked away before she could say anything else, because part of him knew that if he stopped, if he stood still long enough for someone to ask him if this was a good idea, if he was welcome, if Vivian had indicated in any way that she wanted him there, he might listen to the answer. And he was done listening to convenient answers. He found room 412 at the end of the 4th-floor corridor. The door was partially open. He stopped just outside it, and he heard a voice, Margaret Chen's voice, the small woman with the white hair who had come to the hospital the night before and looked at him with 40 years of accumulated judgment in her eyes. "The foundation board met last week," Margaret was saying. "They want to name the new community wing after you. I told them you'd refuse." Vivian's voice, when it came, was quieter than he remembered, slower, the voice of someone operating through pain medication and exhaustion. But the quality of it, the particular quality that had always been Vivian, the one that was both gentle and completely unafraid, that was exactly the same. "You were right," Vivian said. "I'll refuse." "I told them that." The wing should be named after the families it serves, not the person who helped build it. A pause. That's exactly what you said 8 years ago about the East Side program, Margaret said. You haven't changed. Some things don't need to change. Adrian stood outside the door with his hand not quite touching the frame and something happening in his chest that he didn't have a name for. He had known this woman for 17 years. They had been married for 12. He had sat across from her at 1,000 dinners and driven with her through 100 cities and known, in the way you know things about the person whose breathing you have listened to in the dark for over a decade, the shape of who she was. But he hadn't known this. He hadn't known about the foundation, the volunteer work, the community wing, 8 years of quiet building that she had done, not because anyone was watching, not because it would help her reputation or her career or her social standing, but because she believed it mattered and so she did it. He had told people that Vivian had stopped growing. He pressed his back against the wall outside her door and understood with the specific clarity that only comes from being entirely wrong about something important, that she had been growing the entire time. He just hadn't been looking. He knocked. A pause. Then Margaret's voice, "Come in." He pushed the door open. Vivian was in the hospital bed with her left arm in a sling and a white bandage at her temple, and the kind of stillness that comes not from peace, but from the decision to be still, because movement costs too much right now. She looked at him when he walked in. She didn't look away. She also didn't say anything. Margaret Chen looked at him with an expression that was not unfriendly and not warm. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Mrs. Chen." He nodded at her, then looked at Vivian. "I can come back if—" "I'm leaving," Margaret said. She stood, smoothed her jacket, leaned down to press her hand briefly over Vivian's. "Call me when you're ready to discuss the board. No rush." She looked at Adrian once more on her way out, that look again, the one that contained everything she had chosen not to say. And then she was gone, and the door clicked shut behind her, and Adrian was alone with his wife for the first time in 4 months. He didn't sit down. He stood near the door with his hands at his sides, and his jacket slightly wrinkled from the night in the plastic chair, and his eyes doing the thing eyes do when the person in front of you is someone you have hurt, and you are only now beginning to understand the specific dimensions of the hurt. "You look terrible," Vivian said. "I've been here all night." "I know." A pause. "The nurses told me." "I got your note." She looked at him steadily. "Good. I've been trying to understand it." He moved then, not toward her, just to the side, to the chair beside the window where he sat down, because standing was starting to feel like a performance, and he was done performing. "One day you will understand why." "Why what, Vivian?" She was quiet for a moment. "Why I didn't fight," she said. The air in the room changed. "What does that mean? When you told me you wanted out, when you came to me with your lawyers and your prepared speech about growing apart and needing different things." She shifted slightly, winced, settled. "I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I didn't try to convince you to stay. You expected me to. I could see it in your face. You were ready for the argument. You had your answers prepared." He said nothing because she was right. "I didn't fight because I was tired," Vivian continued. "But not in the way you thought. I wasn't tired of you. I was tired of watching you look at our life like it was a cage. I was tired of being the reason in your mind for everything you hadn't done yet." She paused. "You needed to leave. Not because leaving was right, but because you needed to find out what was on the other side of leaving." "Vivian, I'm not finished." He closed his mouth. She had always known how to say that. Not harshly, not as a rebuke, just as a statement of fact. "I'm not finished." And he had always known to wait. "I knew you would come back," she said. "Not to me necessarily. I wasn't counting on that. But back to yourself. The self you were before success started convincing you that you were a different person than you actually are." She looked at him. "I just didn't expect it to happen in a hospital." "I didn't either. How long have you been here?" "Since 7:43 last night." Something moved across her face. Not surprise. Something more complicated than surprise. The expression of a person who has been telling themselves a particular story about another person and has just been handed evidence that the story might need revising. "You stayed all night," she said. "Yes." "Why?" The question was simple and enormous. He thought about giving her the clean answer, the one that sounded right, the one that a better version of himself might have arrived at after careful reflection. And then he decided not to. "Because I couldn't leave," he said. and I didn't want to examine that too closely at first, but I've had all night to sit with it, and I think the honest answer is, I couldn't leave because leaving is what I do. And for once, I didn't want to do the thing I do." Vivian looked at him for a long time. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 3 years," she said. It landed like a hand against the chest. Not a hit, a touch, the kind that stops you. "I know," he said. They sat with that for a moment. The monitor beside her bed beeped softly. Somewhere down the hall, someone was having a conversation that was too muffled to decipher. "Tell me about the foundation," he said. Her eyes changed. A small thing, but he caught it. A kind of opening the way eyes open when the subject is something the person actually loves rather than something they are managing. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. From the beginning." She studied him, deciding something. Then she began. She had started it 2.5 years ago, she said. Not long after he had told her, not announced, but told in the specific way that revealed the decision had already been made, that he was moving into the penthouse and that his lawyers would be in touch regarding the initial separation terms. She had not sat down and cried. She had not called her sister in Phoenix or her best friend from college. She had done what she always did when the ground shifted under her. She had gotten up the next morning, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and thought about what she could actually do. The Harmon Foundation had been looking for a volunteer coordinator for 18 months and couldn't find anyone willing to do the work for what the budget allowed. Vivian had seen the listing. Margaret had forwarded it to her years earlier when they met at a fundraiser, and it had sat in her email like an unread chapter. She read it the morning after Adrian moved his things out. She called Margaret that afternoon. "Margaret asked me what I wanted out of it," Vivian said. "I told her I wanted to be useful." She said that was the best answer she'd heard in 20 years of interviewing volunteers. She had started small, organizing donation drives, connecting families with resources, learning the infrastructure of charitable work from the inside out, which is a different education than anything you can get from writing a check. And then 8 months in, she had an idea, a community health fund, specifically targeted at families who fell into the gap, people who made too much to qualify for government assistance, but not nearly enough to afford the procedures they needed. The gap where people fell through and nothing caught them. She had built it from her own savings, not from the settlement which hadn't been negotiated yet, from her own money, from the account she had maintained independently since the early years of their marriage, when she had understood instinctively the way smart women understand things about money and independence, that the presence of wealth was not the same as security. Within 14 months, the fund had helped 63 families. 63 families, Adrian repeated. 63. She said it without pride, as a fact. The waiting list is longer. We're working on expanding the donor base. Adrian was quiet for a moment. He thought about a number he knew very well, the number he had given last year to a foundation that put his name on a building, the number that had generated 3 press releases and a profile in a business magazine about his philanthropic evolution. That number was 37 times larger than what Vivian had used to help 63 families, and absolutely no one outside of those families and Margaret Chen's small, serious team knew that Vivian had done it. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked. "I told the people who needed to know." "You didn't tell me." "You weren't asking." She said it without accusation, just truth. "You had stopped asking about my life about a year before you moved out, maybe longer. I got so used to it that I stopped noticing when the questions stopped." That one hit him somewhere specific, the place where a person keeps their knowledge of their own failures. "I'm asking now," he said. "I know." She looked at the window. "That's something." The monitor beeped. The muffled conversation down the hall had resolved into the sound of someone laughing, unexpectedly warm and human against the clinical background. "The man you saved," Adrian said, "last night. Who was he?" Vivian's expression softened in a way that had nothing to do with him. "His name is Walter Okafor. He's 78. He lost his wife 6 years ago, and his daughter convinced him to come to the event because she thought it would be good for him to be around people." A pause. He was standing near the temporary stage when the scaffolding on the left side started to give. The crowd moved and he's slow on his feet, his knees are bad, and I was close enough. "So you just went." "I just went." No drama in how she said it, no performance of modesty, just the plain fact of someone who saw something that needed doing and did it. Adrian looked at his hands. He thought about the last time he had done something simply because it needed doing, and not because it would generate a return of some kind. He was having difficulty locating the memory. "Is he okay?" he asked. "He's in the room at the end of the hall," Vivian said. "His daughter has been there all night. I asked a nurse to check on him this morning." Of course she had. Of course. "Vivian!" He looked up. "I don't know how to—" He stopped. The sentence had a dozen possible endings, and every single one of them felt inadequate. "I handled everything wrong. The way I left. The way I talked about you. The way I— He pressed his hand against his jacket pocket where the note was. "I told myself a story about us that let me be the reasonable one, and I knew it was wrong even while I was telling it." She was listening, not responding yet, just listening, which was one of the things she had always done better than anyone he knew. "I brought Camilla here last night," he said. "To this hospital. I had my arm around her in the lobby." He paused. "I need you to know that I know how that was. I'm not going to dress it up." Something crossed her face. Not surprise, not anger. Something older and harder to name. "I know you did," she said. "The nurses told me that too. I'm sorry." "I know." "That's not enough." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." He nodded. He had not expected it to be enough. He had not come here expecting absolution. He didn't know exactly what he had come here expecting, which was itself a change because Adrian Whitmore almost always knew what outcome he was working toward. He wasn't working toward anything right now. He was just here. "Where is she now?" Vivian asked. "Camilla. She went home last night. He chose the word carefully. "We have some things to work out." Vivian nodded slowly. "She seems intelligent, from what I've heard." He looked at her. "You've heard about her?" "Adrian, the whole city has heard about her," said without bitterness. "Just fact. Your relationship has been photographed 11 times in the last 4 months. I've seen 3 of the photos." He had nothing to say to that. "I don't hate her," Vivian said. "I want to be clear about that. She isn't the problem." "I know. You're the problem. Your choices are the problem." "Yes. And you can't solve that with an apology." "I know that too." She shifted in the bed. The wince came back faster this time, and her hand went to her ribs before she steadied herself. He moved forward instinctively 1 degree, the muscle memory of years, and stopped himself. "I'm fine," she said. "I know you're fine," he settled back. "You're always fine." "Don't say it like that's a flaw." "I'm not. I'm saying it like it's—" He struggled. "I'm saying it like it's something I took for granted. Your strength. I leaned on it for years, and then I decided it wasn't what I needed anymore without ever stopping to ask myself what I actually needed versus what I wanted to believe I needed." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that he wasn't expecting. "Do you know why I named the foundation the way I did?" He realized then that he didn't know the name of the foundation. He hadn't thought to ask. "No," he said. "What's it called?" "The Caldwell Park Fund," she said. "Caldwell is my maiden name. I went back to using it on the foundation documentation when we separated." A pause. "Park was my grandmother's name. She came to this country with $40 and didn't speak the language and raised 3 children on her own after my grandfather died." He knew about her grandmother, or he had known once. He had listened to those stories in the first years when everything Vivian said felt essential, when he stored her history like something precious. He had stopped listening somewhere along the way. "She never complained," Vivian said. "Not once from what my mother told me. She just worked, every day, without waiting for anyone to notice or anyone to approve. She built things because things needed building." She looked at him. "I've spent my whole adult life trying to be half as good as she was." Adrian's throat was tight. "You're more than half," he said. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. "That's the kindest thing you've said to me in a very long time," she said quietly. "I mean it. I know you do. That's why it's complicated." And that was the thing about Vivian. She didn't do simple. She didn't accept the easy version of anything. Not easy comfort, not easy absolution, not easy redemption arcs. She saw the complication in kindness just as clearly as she saw the complication in cruelty, and she named it without apology. He had found that quality infuriating somewhere in the middle years of their marriage. Sitting in the chair beside her hospital bed, he recognized it for what it was. The quality of a person who refuses to be dishonest about the world, even when honesty is harder. Even when a pleasant simplification would cost nothing. He was the one who had been doing the easy version, the easy story, the easy exit, the easy new relationship that didn't come with 17 years of history and accountability attached. Easy had cost him everything that mattered. His phone buzzed in his pocket for the 4th time since he'd walked in. He ignored it for the 4th time. Vivian noticed. "You're not going to get that?" "No." "The world hasn't stopped running, Adrian. Whatever's waiting can wait." He looked at her steadily. "I know that's not something you've heard from me often, but it can wait." She held his gaze for a moment and then looked away, and he could see her working something through, recalibrating maybe, adjusting the model she had built over time for what to expect from him. Good, he thought. Let it adjust. He stayed for another hour. They didn't resolve anything. They didn't arrive at conclusions or draw up terms or even speak about the future beyond the immediate logistics of her recovery. He asked about her pain management. She told him it was handled. He asked if there was anything she needed from the apartment. She still had a key, and she said her friend Laura would take care of it. He noticed she didn't say our apartment, and he didn't correct her. But before he left, he stood at the door and he said, "I'm going to do something. I don't want you to read into it or think it means I expect anything from you. I'm going to do it because it's right, not to impress you." She looked at him. "What is it?" "I'm going to call Margaret Chen," he said, "and I'm going to ask her how the foundation can expand, not with my name attached to it, just resources, whatever is needed." Vivian was very still. "That's not your call to make," she said carefully. "I know. I'm going to ask Margaret, who will ask you, and if the answer is no, that's the answer and I'll live with it." He paused. "I'm not trying to buy my way into anything. I know that's—" He stopped, started again. "I know money has been how I solve things. I'm not under the illusion that it solves this. But there are 63 families who got help, and a waiting list that's longer than that, and I have resources, and wasting them because of my own failures would just be adding more failure on top of failure." A long pause. "I'll think about it," Vivian said. "That's all I'm asking." He opened the door. "Adrian." He turned. She was looking at him with that calm that had always frightened him a little, because behind it was something that never wavered. "The woman you were when we first started," she said, "when you didn't have anything yet, and you were building it from nothing. You were more yourself then than you've been in years." He stood in the doorway. "I know," he said. "That man," she paused. "I haven't stopped believing he's still in there. He didn't know what to do with that, so he did the only thing that felt honest." He nodded once slowly, and he walked out of the room and closed the door softly behind him, and he stood in the corridor for a moment, with his hand flat against the door, like it was something he needed to feel the solidity of. Then his phone buzzed again, and this time he looked at it. It wasn't Morrison. It wasn't the board. It wasn't the office. It was Camilla. One message. "We need to talk. Not at the office. Somewhere real." He read it twice, put his phone back in his pocket. He started walking toward the elevator with something in his chest that wasn't quite hope and wasn't quite dread, but was the specific, uncomfortable feeling of a man who has finally stopped moving fast enough to outrun himself and is now going to have to face whatever has been keeping pace behind him the whole time. The elevator doors opened. He stepped in. And as they closed in, the brief second before the floor numbers began to change, he reached into his jacket pocket and touched the folded note. 6 words. "One day you will understand why." He was beginning to. The coffee shop Camilla chose was nothing like the places Adrian usually went. No reservation required, no sommelier, no table by the window because the host recognized the name. Just a corner place 3 blocks from the Whitmore Dynamics offices with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu, and the particular smell of a place that had been making coffee the same way for 20 years and intended to keep doing it exactly like that, regardless of what the world decided was fashionable. Adrian arrived first. That was unusual. He was the kind of man who arrived precisely on time to everything, which in the language of powerful people meant 2 minutes late, because arriving first suggested you had been waiting, and waiting suggested need. He arrived 7 minutes early and sat down and ordered a black coffee and didn't check his phone. That was how Camilla knew when she walked in and saw him that something had fundamentally changed overnight. She sat across from him without a greeting. She was dressed simply, her hair pulled back, no makeup beyond the minimal. She looked younger this way, more like herself and less like the version of herself that existed inside the Whitmore Dynamics ecosystem. She ordered tea. The server left. They looked at each other across a small table in a corner coffee shop at 10:47 in the morning, and neither of them pretended this was going to be easy. "How is she?" Camilla asked. "Stable. Fractured collarbone, cracked ribs, stitches at the temple. She'll recover fully." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. She's very calm." "I remember you telling me once that her calmness annoyed you." He looked at the table. "I remember saying that. I think I understand now why it frightened you instead." He looked up. Camilla had her hands around her own cup, watching him with an expression that was careful and direct in equal measure. She had always been perceptive. He had liked that about her in the beginning, when her perceptiveness was aimed at everyone else. It was different being on the receiving end of it. "Say what you came to say," he told her, not unkindly, just directly, because he owed her at least that, the same directness he had withheld for months behind carefully managed half-truths and the intoxicating forward motion of a relationship that neither of them had fully examined. Camilla took a breath. "I spent last night going through everything," she said. "Not dramatically. I just sat with it, the whole timeline, when we started. What you told me about your marriage, what you said about Vivian, the things I believed." She paused. "The things I chose to believe." "Camilla, let me finish." He closed his mouth, the same way he had closed it when Vivian said those words the night before. Maybe that meant something. Maybe it meant he was finally learning to stop filling silences with his own voice. "You told me she'd changed," Camilla said. "That she'd stopped understanding you, that the marriage had become empty, that you'd grown in different directions, that it was mutual, and it was nobody's fault, and that you both wanted different things." She looked at him steadily. "I built my understanding of your entire situation on the story you told me, and I'm not saying you lied outright. I think you actually believed most of it." "I did believe it," he said. "That's what makes it worse." She set her cup down. "Because a man who knows he's lying can be confronted with the lie. A man who has convinced himself of his own story that's harder. That's someone who has gone so deep into a version of reality that the actual reality has become genuinely invisible to them." Adrian said nothing. "I talked to someone last night," Camilla continued. "A friend of mine. She's a therapist. I called her at 1 in the morning, which tells you something about my state of mind. I told her everything. About you and me, about Vivian, about last night at the hospital." "What did she say?" "She said, and I'm paraphrasing, that the most dangerous relationships are the ones where one person is running away from something and the other person becomes the destination, because the runner doesn't actually see the destination, they see the running." The words landed with the particular weight of things that are true in a way that is physically uncomfortable. Adrian felt them in his chest behind his sternum, in the place where a person keeps the things they know about themselves that they have not yet allowed themselves to fully know. "You were running," Camilla said, "and I think I was the idea of somewhere to run to, something new, someone who didn't know the weight of what you'd built and what you'd let slide and who you'd been failing to be." She paused. "That's not a relationship. That's an escape route with a person attached to it." He picked up his coffee, put it down without drinking. "You deserved better than that," he said. "Yes," she said simply. "I did." No performance of graciousness, just the plain fact of it. "So did she." He nodded. "So did she," he agreed. The coffee shop went on around them. Someone at the counter laughed. A child at the table to their left was telling her father something in an urgent whisper, both hands moving. The ordinary world continuing without permission. "I'm ending this," Camilla said. "Whatever this has been, I'm ending it." He had known it was coming. He had known it since the elevator doors closed that morning, maybe since earlier, maybe since the moment in the hospital lobby when he'd said her name and his voice had done the thing it did. "I understand," he said. "I need you to understand that it's not because of last night, not entirely." She was careful with her words, the way intelligent people are careful when they want to be accurate rather than simply right. "It's because when I sat with it honestly, really honestly, I could see that I had been telling myself the same kind of story you were telling yourself, a story where this was real and sustainable and going somewhere." She shook her head. "I'm 29. I'm good at my job. I have a life that I want to build on a foundation that's actually solid. And this," she gestured between them, "this is not a foundation. This is two people borrowing something that belongs to someone else's story." Adrian looked at her. He stopped. "What? That's one of the most precise things anyone has ever said to me." She almost smiled. Not quite. I've had all night to find the right words. You should keep that job, he said. Not mine. Somewhere that... He paused. Somewhere that's actually right for you. You're too sharp to spend your career managing someone else's disasters. She looked at him for a moment. Was that an attempt at a compliment or a job reference? Both. Neither. I don't know. He shook his head. He exhaled. I'm sorry, Camilla. Not as a formality. Actually sorry. For what I told you about my marriage. For the story I let you believe. For walking you into a hospital lobby with my hand on your back while my wife was down the hall. I'm sorry for all of it. She was quiet for a moment. I know you are, she said. I believe that. She picked up her tea. That's the thing about you, Adrian. When you're actually present in a moment when something cuts through all the noise and the forward motion and the performance of who you've become, you're real. You're actually a real person underneath all of it. She looked at him directly. I think you've just spent about a decade letting the performance crowd the real person out. And I think Vivian is the only one who ever saw both versions and chose you anyway. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say, because she was right. His phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it this time. Not Morrison, not the board. It was his assistant flagging an email marked urgent from the Foundation's legal team. He frowned. I need to look at this, he said. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Camilla gestured. This too was different. A month ago, she would have waited with practiced patience, the kind that was performance. This was something else. This was a person who had already made her decision and was simply present until the conversation completed. He opened the email and went very still. The email was from Catherine Marsh, the attorney handling the Caldwell Park Fund's legal paperwork for their 501c3 status expansion. It was addressed to Margaret Chen and CC'd to a list of Foundation board members, and Adrian's name was nowhere on that list. But the content of the email was, specifically a competing grant application from a newly formed charitable fund called the Whitmore Community Initiative had filed for the same city funding pool that the Caldwell Park Fund was applying for. A pool with a fixed total that meant one application would crowd out the other. The competing application had been filed 3 days ago, before last night, before the hospital, before any of this. Filed under his name, filed by someone at his company, without his knowledge. What is it? Camilla asked. He handed her the phone without speaking. She read it. Her face changed. Did you authorize this? She asked. No. His voice was flat. Who at your company would have done this? He already knew. He knew before the name fully formed in his mind, because there was only one person who monitored the philanthropic landscape closely enough and had both the access and the motivation. Derek Holt, his director of corporate affairs. A man who had been managing Whitmore Dynamics' public image for 6 years with the particular aggressive loyalty of someone who believed his job was to protect the brand first and ask ethical questions a distant second. Adrian called him. Derek picked up on the second ring. Adrian, I was going to brief you on, did you file a grant application for the Whitmore Community Initiative against the city's North Side Community Fund? A brief pause, the pause of a man recalibrating. I filed it last Tuesday. It's a strong application. The fund pool is almost $3 million, and we had a clear case for... Did you know the Caldwell Park Fund was also applying for that pool? Another pause. Longer this time. I was aware there were other applications in the field, yes. Caldwell Park Derek, specifically. The silence on the other end of the line was its own answer. I was protecting the company's philanthropic positioning, Derek said finally. His voice had the quality of a man who believes he is justified and is now calculating how to present that justification. The optics of your wife's foundation operating in the same space while your separation is ongoing. She is not. Adrian stopped, controlled his voice, started again. Withdraw the application. Adrian, the board has already... Withdraw it. Today. Before noon. And then clear your afternoon because you and I are going to have a conversation about what your job actually is. He ended the call. He set the phone on the table. His hand was not entirely steady. Camilla was watching him. Someone filed a competing application against her foundation without telling you, she said. Yes. And this person thought they were doing you a favor. Yes. Because protecting your image has become so automatic inside your company that the people around you act preemptively to eliminate threats, even ones that aren't actually threats, even ones that are She stopped. Even ones that are actually good things that my wife built, Adrian finished. Yes. The silence that followed had weight, because what had just been revealed wasn't just Derek Holt's misguided loyalty. It was the shape of a machine that Adrian had built and run and fueled with 15 years of absolute priority placed on his own forward momentum, and the machine had continued running in his image, even when he wasn't watching, even when what it was running over was something that deserved to be protected. He had built a thing that worked against what mattered without even having to instruct it to. That was the worst kind of wrong, the kind that doesn't require intention. He stood up. "I need to go to the office," he said. Camilla nodded. She was already picking up her bag with the efficiency of someone who has said what they came to say and is ready to move back into her own life. "Camilla," he stopped. "For what it's worth, you're going to be fine. Better than fine. Whatever you build next, it'll be something real." She looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said. "I've always known that. I just let myself forget it for a while." She walked out first. He left 2 minutes later into the late morning of a city that was going about its business, and he moved through it differently than he had moved through anything in a long time. Not with the forward momentum that had defined him. Not with the performance of a man who had somewhere important to be. Just a man going somewhere he needed to go to clean up a mess he was responsible for, because that was what you did. He reached the office at 11:22. Derek was waiting in the conference room. He had clearly been briefed by the assistant that the conversation was coming, and had arranged himself accordingly, jacket on files in front of him, the posture of a man prepared to defend a position. Adrian walked in, closed the door, and sat down. He didn't raise his voice. He had learned years ago that raised voices were for people who needed to perform authority. Actual authority operated at a lower frequency. "Tell me exactly what you were thinking," he said. Derek told him. In the careful language of corporate strategy, he laid out the logic. The separation was public. The philanthropic space was competitive. Vivian's foundation had been gaining attention that complicated the Whitmore Dynamics narrative, and the City Fund application had been an opportunity to establish the company's charitable presence in the same geographic territory before Vivian's foundation could consolidate it. Adrian listened to all of it without interrupting. When Derek finished, Adrian said, "So you decided that my wife's charitable work that has helped 63 families was a threat to my brand positioning, and you moved against it without telling me." Derek shifted slightly. "I didn't think you'd want to be in the position of making that call directly. You were protecting me from a decision you assumed I would want made." "Yes, by doing something I would never have authorized." A pause. You thought wrong." Adrian leaned back slightly. "Not just ethically wrong, strategically wrong. If this had gone forward, if the Caldwell Park Fund had lost that grant because of an application filed by my company, do you understand what that would have looked like? Do you understand the story that becomes—" Derek opened his mouth, closed it. "Billionaire uses corporate resources to undermine estranged wife's charity work," Adrian said flatly. "That's the headline, and I would have deserved it, because even if I didn't know this came from my company, which means it came from me. That's how accountability works." He held Derek's gaze. "Withdraw the application. Donate the funds that were earmarked for the initiative to the Caldwell Park Fund directly, anonymously, and write a memo to every department head reminding them that any philanthropic, legal, or public-facing action taken in the company's name requires the donation to the Caldwell Park Fund, anonymously. Won't people ask?" "Nobody will ask," Adrian said, "because nobody is going to know it was us. That's what anonymous means." Adrian, from a positioning standpoint. "Derek," his voice dropped one register, "I'm not interested in the positioning standpoint right now. I'm interested in the right standpoint. Figure out which one of those is your job and get back to me." He stood up and left the conference room. In his office, he stood at the window for a moment. Chicago below him, the same city it always was. He used to stand here and feel like he owned something. Right now, he felt like he was just beginning to understand what it meant to be responsible for something. His phone rang. Margaret Chen. He answered. "Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was brisk and professional, and carrying something underneath it that he was learning to identify. A kind of watchfulness. "I've just received notice that a competing grant application filed by your company is being withdrawn." "Yes." "And that a donation is being directed to the Caldwell Park Fund." "Yes." A pause. Can I ask what prompted this? I found out about it this morning, he said. It was filed without my authorization. I'm correcting it. Another pause. Longer. Vivian doesn't know yet, Margaret said. I know. I'd like it to stay that way. This isn't... He exhaled. This isn't a gesture toward Vivian. This is just the right thing to do. The foundation does good work. It deserves the funding it earned. Margaret was quiet for a moment. You know, she said, I've been in this work for 40 years. I've dealt with a lot of wealthy men and their charitable impulses. Most of them are sincere in their way. But sincerity usually comes with a name attached to it. A pause. You're asking to do the right thing invisibly. Yes. That's rare. I should have been doing it all along, he said. He heard something shift in Margaret's voice. Not warmth exactly, more like the recalibration he had heard in Vivian's voice that morning, the adjustment of a model. She's going to be discharged tomorrow, Margaret said. She'll need help at home for the first week. Her friend Laura has offered, but it's going to be limited because Laura has children. A pause. I'm not telling you this for any reason other than information. I understand, he said. Thank you. He hung up and stood at the window a while longer. Then he did something he hadn't done in months. He opened his contacts, scrolled past the board members and the lawyers and the investors and the analysts, and he called his sister. Rebecca picked up on the third ring. Adrian, is everything okay? No, he said. Not entirely. Can you talk? I've got 20 minutes before a meeting. Go. That's enough. He sat down at his desk. I need to talk to someone who knew me before all of this. Before the company. Before everything. A pause. I need someone to remind me who I used to be. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing, the slight sound of her chair as she settled into it. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in about 3 years, she said. I know. She's still the right person for you, Rebecca said. Not as a preamble, just directly, because Rebecca had always operated directly. That's not... He stopped. I'm not calling about that. I know you're not, but it's still true. A pause. Tell me what happened. So he told her. All of it. Not the edited version he gave to business partners. Not the narrative-managed version he had given to his social circle. All of it. The hospital, the note, Camilla, the foundation, Derek and the grant application, the conversation with Vivian this morning, her voice slow and measured, and the expression on her face when he told her he'd stayed all night. Rebecca listened to all of it the way she had always listened, which was completely. Without interrupting. Without rushing to the response. When he finished, she said, You know what the difference is between you now and you 6 months ago? What? 6 months ago you would have told me a story. Right now you told me the truth. A pause. That's not nothing, Adrian. It might be too late. Maybe, she said simply. Probably for some things, but not for everything. Not for the person you're capable of being. That doesn't have an expiration date. He pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. I don't know how to do this, he said. I don't know how to move through the world without the story. Without the version of myself I've been performing. I've been doing it so long I don't know where the performance ends and the actual person begins. Yes, you do, Rebecca said. You knew last night. You knew the minute you saw her on that gurney and your whole system shut down. You knew in the hospital room this morning when you told her the truth without dressing it up. Her voice was steady. You know, you just keep waiting for permission to act on what you know. Who gives that permission? You do. A pause. You always did. You just got confused about who was in charge. He sat with that. His 20 minutes were nearly up. He could hear it in the slight shift in her breathing, the awareness of the clock. Rebecca, he said, I need to ask you something. Ask. Was there a specific point where you watched me and thought, that's where he went wrong? A long pause, longer than the others. Yes, she said. When? The night of the Meridian deal, 4 years ago. Do you remember you'd just closed the largest acquisition of your career? We had dinner the whole family at that restaurant you'd reserved 3 months in advance, and Vivian made a toast. She talked about everything you'd built together, about the early years, about what it had taken. She was crying when she finished. Good crying. The kind that means something. A pause. And you thanked her and moved straight into talking about the next deal. The next thing. Like what she said was a stepping stone to the next announcement. Her voice was careful. She put her glass down and smiled, and no one else noticed. but I was watching her face, and something went quiet in it, something that had been open-closed. He remembered that dinner. He remembered the deal numbers, the handshake, the press release ready to go at midnight. He could not remember Vivian's toast. He could not remember a single word of it. "I should have said something then," Rebecca said. "I've thought about that. It wasn't your—" "I know, but I've thought about it," she exhaled. "You have to understand, Adrian, that when people love someone, really love them, they don't want to be the one who tells the truth if it means blowing up what that person has built. So they stay quiet. And the quiet becomes permission, and the permission becomes this, what you're sitting inside of right now." He was quiet for a moment. "I need to go," she said, "but I want to say one more thing." "Go ahead." "Don't make this about winning her back. That's the wrong frame. That's still the billionaire frame, the deal frame. Win the thing, close the transaction, get the outcome." Her voice was firm. "She is not a transaction. Whatever happens, whatever she decides, your job right now is to become someone who deserves to be near her. Not to close a deal, just to be someone deserving." A pause. "Can you do that without a guaranteed return on investment?" It was the hardest question anyone had asked him in his life, because he didn't know the answer, and he said so. "I don't know," he said, "but I'm going to find out." Rebecca hung up. He sat at his desk in the quiet of his office, the enormous window behind him, and he thought about a woman in a hospital room 4 miles away who had spent 2.5 years building something good and quiet and real, and who had never once used it to make herself look larger than she was, and who had written 6 words on a piece of hospital notepaper and trusted that they would eventually reach the part of him that still understood what they meant. He pulled the note out of his jacket pocket. "One day you will understand why." He had understood why she didn't fight. He had understood why she built the foundation quietly. He had understood why she stayed calm in that hospital room instead of giving him the anger he expected and arguably deserved. But there was one thing he hadn't asked, one why he hadn't unpacked, why she still believed, despite everything that the man his sister remembered, was still in there somewhere. He put the note back in his pocket, and he started to think about what it would actually take to prove her right. Not to win anything, not to close anything, not to stand at the window of a 43-floor penthouse and look at a city he had convinced himself he owned, just to prove her right, just to be quietly and without announcement the person that 2 women who understood him better than he understood himself apparently still believed he could be. His computer screen showed 14 unread emails. His assistant had flagged 6 of them as requiring same-day response. The board presentation was in 48 hours. The North Tower environmental assessment still hadn't come through. He looked at all of it. And then he picked up his phone and called the catering company that handled executive orders and asked them to deliver lunch to room 412 at Cedar Valley Medical Center. Something with options, he said. Something warm. Leave it at the nurse's station with no card. Just food. Just something warm. Because a woman with a fractured collarbone and cracked ribs was going to be hungry, and the person who knew her best in the world knew she would never ask. He hung up, looked at the 14 emails, started with number 1. The world wasn't going to wait for him to finish becoming a better person before it continued requiring him to function. That was fine. That was real. The trick, the thing he was only now beginning to understand after 17 years of getting it wrong, was that functioning and becoming didn't have to happen in separate lives. You could be both at once. You just had to decide that being mattered as much as doing. He typed the first response. Outside Chicago continued. The foundation somewhere in the city was helping a family he would never meet. Walter Okafor was in a room at the end of a hospital hallway, recovering from a night he hadn't expected because a woman had seen him falling and simply gone. And in room 412, Vivian Caldwell, calm and fractured and completely infuriatingly remarkably herself, was resting. Lunch would arrive in 40 minutes. She wouldn't know who sent it. That was exactly the point. Vivian was discharged on a Tuesday. Laura Simmons arrived at Cedar Valley at 9 in the morning with a bag of groceries, a change of clothes, and the particular energy of a woman who had been Vivian's closest friend for 22 years and was not going to let the fact that her own life contained 2 elementary school children, a demanding job, and a husband who traveled for work stop her from being exactly where she needed to be. She walked into room 412 and found Vivian already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed with her arm in its sling and her posture straighter than anyone with 2 cracked ribs had any business maintaining. "You look terrible," Laura said. Good morning to you too, Vivian said. I mean it. You look like someone who got hit by scaffolding and then refused to lie down about it. That's almost precisely what happened. Laura set the bag down and hugged her carefully, the practiced hug of someone who knew exactly where the damage was and worked around it. Vivian closed her eyes for a moment and let herself be held, which was its own kind of data point for anyone paying attention, because Vivian Caldwell did not typically let herself be held. She was the holder, the one who steadied other people. Being on the receiving end of steadiness was unfamiliar territory, and she was navigating it with the same careful attention she gave to everything. Adrian called me, Laura said, pulling back. Her voice was neutral, but her eyes were not. Vivian went still. When by yesterday afternoon, he got my number from I don't know one of his people. He called to tell me you were being discharged today and to ask if I had everything I needed to help you for the first week. She watched Vivian's face carefully. He had a grocery list, an actual list, things you like, things that are easy to eat with one hand. Vivian said nothing for a moment. He didn't call me, she said finally. I know. He specifically said he didn't want you to know he'd called. Laura tilted her head. He said, and I'm quoting, I'm not doing this for credit. I just want to make sure she has what she needs. The monitor that had been counting Vivian's heartbeat for 3 days beeped one final time as a nurse came in to disconnect it. Vivian watched the nurse work with the distant expression of someone whose mind is elsewhere. He sent lunch yesterday, she said quietly. No card. Margaret found out somehow and told me. She thought it was funny. A pause. I didn't. Was it good lunch at least? Despite everything, the corner of Vivian's mouth moved. It was excellent lunch. Then he's learning, Laura said. Vivian stood up slowly, carefully, with the deliberate economy of movement that came from knowing exactly how much each motion would cost. She picked up her bag with her good arm and looked around the room once the way people look at places they are leaving and won't return to taking stock filing it somewhere. Let's go home, she said. They walked out of Cedar Valley Medical Center at 9:41 in the morning into a city that had kept moving without them as cities do. Adrian was not in the lobby. Vivian had not expected him to be, but she noticed the absence the way you notice a word that isn't on a page, not as a gap exactly, but as a shape. The shape of a choice someone had made. He could have been there. He had chosen not to be, and she was still working out whether that was consideration or retreat. She had been working out a lot of things. 3 days in a hospital bed with limited mobility and nothing to do but think. Was it turned out exactly the kind of forced stillness that Vivian had been avoiding for 2 years? She had filled the time since the separation with work, the foundation, the volunteer coordination, the meetings and the applications and the families and the logistics of building something real from the ground up. She had filled it well. She didn't regret a minute of it. But the filling had also been a form of not sitting with things, and now she had sat with them, all of them. The hospital room had a particular quality of honesty that she hadn't expected. Maybe it was the enforced stillness. Maybe it was the absence of her routines, the things she used to structure her days in ways that kept her moving forward without requiring her to look sideways. Whatever it was in those 3 days, she had found herself thinking about things she had successfully not thought about for months. The way Adrian had looked when he walked into her room that morning. Not the polished version, not the man on the magazine covers, just a man who had been awake all night in a plastic chair and hadn't left, because as he'd put it with the specific honesty of someone who has run out of other options, he couldn't. The way his voice had dropped when he said her name in the lobby. She hadn't seen that. She'd been on the gurney staring at the ceiling, practicing the specific art of staying calm that she had developed over a lifetime of being the person in the room who stayed calm. But the nurses had told her afterward. 3 separate nurses at 3 separate times had mentioned it without being asked. He said your name like he'd forgotten how to say anything else, one of them had offered with the particular candor of night shift workers who have seen enough of human nature to call it plainly. Vivian had filed that away. She was still filing things. The car Laura had called was waiting. They got in. The driver pulled into traffic. Chicago moved past the windows in the particular way it moved in the morning. Purposeful layered a city that had decided a long time ago that it was going to be exactly what it was and nothing else. Tell me what you're thinking, Laura said. I'm thinking about the foundation board meeting Thursday, Vivian said. Laura gave her a look. That's not what you're thinking about. Laura, You've been married to him for 12 years. You've known him for 17. He showed up. He stayed all night. He called me with a grocery list. She paused. What are you actually thinking? Vivian was quiet for a long moment. I'm thinking, she said carefully, that I have spent 2 years being very certain about what I knew, about what had happened to us, and who he had become, and what was possible and what wasn't. And I'm thinking that some of that certainty might have been not wrong exactly, but... She stopped. Incomplete. Meaning I knew what he had done, I understood it clearly, but I think I had also decided what was possible for him going forward, and I'm not sure I had the right to decide that. Laura was quiet for a moment, which was unusual. Laura was not typically a quiet person. You're not saying you're taking him back, she said slowly. I'm not saying anything about taking anyone back. That's not... Vivian shook her head. That's not the question I'm asking. The question I'm asking is whether I was completely honest about who he could be, or whether I decided he was fixed at his worst point. He was pretty bad at his worst point, Laura said. He paraded that girl. I know, Vivian's voice was even. I was there for all of it. I know what he did. I'm not revising history. She looked out the window. I'm asking a different question. I'm asking whether people can actually change, whether I believe that. Do you... A long pause. I built a foundation on the belief that people in hard situations can do better if someone gives them real support, Vivian said. That's the entire premise of the Caldwell Park Fund, that circumstances aren't destiny, that people aren't fixed. She paused. It would be somewhat inconsistent of me to apply that belief to strangers and not to the man I married. Laura looked at her for a long moment. You are, she said, the most complicated, simple person I have ever known. Despite everything, Vivian laughed. It cost her. She pressed her good hand to her ribs instinctively, but it was real and warm and entirely herself. Don't make me laugh, she said. It hurts. Stop being profound and it won't be a problem. The car pulled up to Vivian's apartment, the one she had moved into 11 months ago, smaller than the home she and Adrian had shared on a quieter street, with a window in the kitchen that got morning light, and a building manager named Gerald, who had a dog named Pretzel and always held the elevator. It was hers, entirely hers. She had furnished it without consulting anyone. She had chosen the colors and the curtains and the specific quality of silence she wanted in each room. She had made it into a place that reflected who she actually was, rather than the intersection of two people's tastes. She loved it. She also knew that loving a place that was entirely yours was sometimes a way of not examining what it cost to get there. Laura got her settled on the couch with her medication and a glass of water and the remote control, and then moved into the kitchen to put away the groceries. Vivian could hear her from the couch, the familiar sounds of someone who knew where things went, who had been in this kitchen enough times to navigate it without asking. Her phone was on the cushion beside her. She looked at it for a moment, then she opened her messages. There was one from Adrian, sent at 6:47 that morning. It said, I hope today goes smoothly. I'm not going to contact you again unless you reach out first. That's a promise, not a guilt trip. She read it 3 times. Then she set the phone face down on the cushion. Laura appeared in the kitchen doorway. Soup is on, 40 minutes. She looked at Vivian's face. What happened? Nothing. Vivian paused. He texted. What did he say? She told her. Laura was quiet for a moment. Then she said, That's a very un-Adrian thing to say. Yes, Vivian agreed. It is. People can surprise you. Yes, Vivian said again. They can. She picked up her phone, looked at his message again, put it face down again, and then she did what she always did when something required more thinking than she had available in the moment. She set it aside and let it sit the way you let dough rest, not ignoring it, not rushing it, just trusting that the right thing would reveal itself when it was ready. 3 days passed. On the first day, Margaret came by in the afternoon, and they talked about the foundation for 2 hours. The city grant had come through the full amount because the competing application had been withdrawn. Margaret mentioned this with the particular careful neutrality of someone who has information they have decided to present as simple fact. The Whitmore application was pulled, she said, 3 days ago, before you were discharged. Vivian looked at her. I heard. And the anonymous donation. I heard that too. Anonymous is doing a lot of work in that sentence, Margaret said. I know. A pause. He didn't put his name on it, Margaret said. I've been doing this for 40 years. Men with money almost always put their names on things. Even when they say they won't, there's usually a plaque somewhere, a press release, something. She looked at Vivian directly. There's nothing. I checked. Vivian looked at her hands. What does that tell you? Margaret asked. It tells me he's learning the difference between doing good and being seen doing good, Vivian said. Whether it's permanent or whether it's strategic, I can't know yet. Fair enough, Margaret said. She stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I've met a lot of people who say they've changed. He's the first one in a long time who seems to understand that saying it is the least important part. Vivian said nothing. Margaret left. On the second day, Walter Okafor called. She hadn't expected that. She had given him her number through the hospital, in case he needed anything during his own recovery. She had assumed he wouldn't use it. Most people don't with strangers, even strangers who have done them significant service. Walter Okafor was not most people. His voice on the phone was deep and slightly formal, the voice of a man who had grown up in a time when telephone calls were considered serious occasions that warranted a certain gravity. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, I hope I'm not disturbing you. You're not, she said. How are you feeling? Better than I should be given the circumstances. The doctors are pleased. My daughter is less pleased because she blames herself for bringing me to the event, but I have told her that is nonsense. A pause. I'm calling to thank you, which I know is insufficient. My daughter suggested flowers, but I told her flowers were also insufficient. She suggested a donation to your foundation, which I told her was more appropriate, but still not quite equal to what I owe you. Vivian smiled. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Okafor. I owe you my life, Mrs. Caldwell. That's not a figure of speech. I owe you my actual life. His voice was steady, but underneath the steadiness was something that had weight. My daughter is getting married in April. I would not have been there for that without you. My first grandchild is expected in September. I would not have been there for that either. A pause. So you see the flowers were not going to cover it. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Please be at your daughter's wedding, she said. That's thanks enough. I intend to be, he said, and I intend to tell that story, the story of what you did at every appropriate occasion for the rest of my life. After she hung up, she sat with the phone in her hand for a long time. This was why. This was why she had built the fund. This was why she showed up at events she didn't have to attend and organized programs that no one required her to organize and pushed an old man out of the path of a collapsing scaffold without stopping to consider whether it was her job to do so. Because a man named Walter Okafor was going to be at his daughter's wedding in April. Because that mattered. Because mattering quietly, really without a plaque, was the whole point. Her phone buzzed, not Adrian this time, a number she didn't recognize. She answered, Vivian Caldwell. Yes. This is James Cortland. I'm a journalist with the Chicago Tribune. I'm working on a profile piece about the Caldwell Park Fund, and I was hoping... How did you get this number? A pause. I spoke with a source who... What source? Another pause. Longer. I was told that the fund had received a significant anonymous donation, and I was... I'm going to stop you there, Vivian said. Her voice was even and absolute. I don't speak to press about the foundation's donors or our finances. If you'd like to write about the families we serve with their permission, I would consider that. If you're writing about funding sources, I have nothing for you. A pause. How did you get this number? The journalist paused again. I spoke to someone at Whitmore Dynamics. Vivian went very still. Not Adrian. She was almost certain it wasn't Adrian. He had promised. And whatever else he had never been a man who lied outright. His particular brand of dishonesty had always been the self-deception variety rather than the deliberate kind. Derek Holt, or someone like Derek Holt, someone inside the machine who had seen the donation and decided against explicit instruction that there was a story worth managing. Thank you for calling, she said. Don't call this number again. She hung up. Then she called Adrian. He answered on the second ring, and the speed of it told her he had been waiting not anxiously, but attentively. The way you wait for something you're not going to force, but haven't forgotten. Someone at your company spoke to a Tribune journalist about the donation, she said. No greeting, no preamble, because they were past that. A silence on his end, brief but complete. Say that again, he said quietly. She said it again. The silence that followed was different from the first one, darker. I'll find out who, he said. I need you to understand something, Vivian said. Her voice was controlled, but underneath the control was something that had edges. I have spent 2.5 years building something that operates entirely on trust. The families we serve trust that their privacy is protected. Our donors trust that their contributions are handled with integrity. If this story gets written, if someone connects the anonymous donation to your company and then connects your company to me through the separation, it changes the entire public perception of what the foundation is. It makes it look like a reconciliation gesture, Adrian finished. Like I funded your charity to win you back. Yes, I know. His voice was taut. I know exactly how that looks, and I know exactly how much damage that story does to what you've built. A pause. Vivian, I swear to you, I did not speak to anyone in the press. I told Derek specifically. I know it wasn't you, she said. A beat. You know, I know the difference between a mistake you make and a mistake someone makes while trying to help you, she said. I've known you for 17 years. Something shifted in his voice, something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite gratitude, but was somewhere between the two. I'm going to fix this, he said. I know you are. I'm calling to make sure you understand what needs fixing and why. I understand. The foundation is not a story about us, she said. It was never about us. It was never about you. Whatever is happening between you and me, it is separate, and it stays separate. The foundation belongs to the families it serves. Yes, he said. I understand that completely. Good. She paused. Fix it. She hung up. Her hand was shaking slightly. She pressed it flat against her knee and waited for it to stop the way she waited for most things without drama, with patience, with the specific stubbornness of a person who refuses to let her body's reactions become performances. Laura appeared in the kitchen doorway with a look that said she had heard the call and was not going to pretend she hadn't. Do you want to talk about it? Laura asked. Not yet, Vivian said. Laura nodded and went back to the kitchen. That was the other thing about real friendship, knowing when not yet meant not yet. Adrian called back 22 minutes later. It was Derek's assistant, he said, the moment she picked up. No greeting, matching her energy from the previous call. She overheard Derek discussing the donation and thought she was being helpful by building a relationship with the press. She didn't understand what she was doing. A pause. I spoke to the journalist directly. I told him there was no story. I explained that the donation was genuinely anonymous and unconnected to any personal circumstances, and that if a story ran implying otherwise, I would have our legal team look at every aspect of how he obtained a private phone number. A pause. He agreed there was no story. Derek, Vivian asked, has been spoken to in terms that I think he understood this time. You didn't fire him. No. A pause. But I will if it happens again. He needs to understand that protecting this company doesn't mean operating in the space between what I've authorized and what he thinks I should want. Vivian absorbed that. Okay, she said. I'm sorry this happened. I know. A pause, longer than the others. The kind of pause that has something waiting in it. You called me, he said finally, not accusingly, just noting it. The way you note a fact that changes the geography of something. I called you because it was your company, she said. I know. Another pause. But you called me, not Margaret, not a lawyer, me. She said nothing. I'm not reading into it, he said quickly. I promised I wouldn't. I'm just noting it. You've been doing a lot of noting lately, she said. I've been trying to pay attention, he said. I know I'm about 15 years late to that particular practice, but I'm doing my best. Despite herself, she felt something in her chest move. Not forgiveness, that was a much longer road. Not even warmth exactly. Something more like recognition. The recognition of a quality she had fallen in love with a long time ago, before the money and the power and the performance had layered over it. The quality of a man who, when he finally decided to be honest, was completely honest. No hedging, no positioning, just the truth delivered directly, even when the truth made him look small. She had missed that quality. She had missed it more than she had let herself know. Adrian, she said. Yes. I need you to understand something about what comes next. Okay. I'm not there yet, where you might be hoping I am. I don't know if I'll ever be there. I need you to genuinely hold that possibility, not as a hurdle you're going to clear, as an actual possibility that might be the final answer. She paused. Can you do that? A long silence. Yes, he said. I can't hold that. I won't pretend it doesn't. He stopped. It's harder than anything I've done. But yes, I can hold it. Because if you're doing this, she said carefully, the showing up, the not putting your name on things, the grocery list. You know about the grocery list. Laura told me. Of course she did. He exhaled. I'm doing it because it's right, not because it's a strategy. I know you have no reason to believe that yet. I don't, she said, but I'm watching, and I'm a very accurate observer. I know, he said. That's terrifying, frankly. She almost smiled again. She seemed to be almost smiling more than she had in months. Good, she said. Hold on to that. She ended the call. Laura was in the kitchen doorway again. I have a question, Laura said. 1. Are you actually considering it not the fairy tale version, the real version, the hard, complicated, this will take years version? Vivian was quiet for a long moment. I'm considering, she said, whether the person I married still exists inside the person he became, and whether if he does, I have the capacity to allow for that. She looked at Laura directly. That's a different question than whether I'm taking him back. I'm not ready for that question. But the first question, I think I owe it to 17 years, to at least ask it honestly. Laura looked at her for a long moment. You know what I think, she said. Tell me. I think you already know the answer to the first question. I think you've known since he stayed all night in that plastic chair. She paused. I think the second question is the one scaring you. Vivian looked at her friend. 22 years of friendship, the kind that had survived everything, and knew the difference between what Vivian said and what Vivian meant. Yes, she said quietly. It is. Laura nodded once, went back to the kitchen without another word. The soup was ready in 10 minutes. They ate together at the small table by the window that got morning light in the apartment that was entirely Vivian's in the city, that continued without permission, and they talked about Laura's children and the foundation board meeting and a book they had both been meaning to read for a year and hadn't. They didn't talk about Adrian again, but he was there. In the space between words, in the weight of questions that had been asked and not yet answered, in the shape of the absence that a person leaves when they have been significant enough in your life that even removing them doesn't fully clear the air they used to occupy, he was there. And Vivian, who was the most accurate observer she knew, was watching. Not to decide, not yet, just watching. Because that was what you did when something mattered. When you had invested 17 years and 3 days in a hospital bed and a note, with 6 words and a phone call about a grocery list, and the specific quality of a man's voice when it said your name and forgot to say anything else. You watched. You paid attention. You let the truth emerge at its own pace, because the truth, unlike deals and acquisitions and board presentations, could not be rushed. It arrived when it arrived, and Vivian Caldwell had learned in 44 years of being exactly herself that the things worth waiting for were always worth the waiting. Outside, the city moved. November was coming in off the lake the way November always came to Chicago, with the particular conviction of a season that knows it belongs there, cold and clear and without apology. Vivian looked out the window at it, and felt for the first time in a very long time something that wasn't quite peace, but was heading in that direction, something that felt like the possibility of what came after surviving, not the end of something, the beginning. She just wasn't ready to say that out loud yet, but it was there, she felt it, and she trusted what she felt. November became December without asking anyone's permission. The city shifted the way Chicago always shifted in winter, not gently, not gradually, but all at once, as if the lake had made a decision overnight, and the rest of the city had no choice but to comply. The cold came in with conviction and stayed. Vivian's ribs healed. The collarbone took longer. She wore the sling for 3 weeks and then quietly retired it one morning without announcing it to anyone, because she was not the kind of person who made announcements about recovering. She simply recovered. She went back to the foundation the following Monday. Margaret had told her to take another week. She had thanked Margaret for the advice and shown up anyway. Adrian knew she was back at work because Margaret told him, not because Vivian did. He and Vivian spoke twice that first month after her discharge. Both times she had called him. Both times it was about something specific, once about the city grant documentation that required a signature she couldn't locate in the foundation's files, and once about the divorce proceedings which had stalled because neither of their lawyers could agree on the terms of a particular property clause. Both conversations were professional. Careful. The conversations of two people who know each other deeply and are choosing deliberately to operate in the shallow water until one of them decides it's time to go deeper. He did not push, she noticed. He had sold the penthouse in November. She found out through Rebecca, who called her not at Adrian's request. She clarified immediately, just because she thought Vivian should know, because they were still family, regardless of what the lawyers said, and family didn't let family find out important things through newspaper property listings. He sold it, Rebecca said. Closed last week. He's in a smaller place now, near the river. He said he didn't need 43 floors anymore. Vivian had been quiet for a moment. Did he say why he sold it? He said... Rebecca paused, and Vivian could tell she was choosing between the diplomatic version and the real one. He said it was a monument to the wrong version of himself, and he didn't want to live in a monument. Vivian had sat with that for a long time after the call ended. A monument to the wrong version of himself. She knew that building. She had stood at its windows. She had watched Adrian become someone different inside it degree by degree, the way water slowly changes the shape of stone, not in any single dramatic moment, but through the accumulated weight of time and pressure, and the particular erosion of a man who started believing his own press. She had watched it happen and said nothing until there was nothing left to say. That was her part, the part she had sat with in the hospital bed and continued sitting with after. She had been so committed to her own dignity, to not begging, to not fighting, to rising above it all, with the particular graceful stoicism that everyone around her admired, that she had never once in the final years told him the truth directly. That she was lonely, that she was watching him disappear into something she didn't recognize, that she needed him to see her actually see her, and he had stopped looking. She had said none of it. She had simply built her foundation and helped her families and saved strangers from falling scaffolding and written 6 words on a piece of hospital notepaper and called it honesty. It was honesty. But it was the kind of honesty that arrived too late and sideways, and she knew that. She knew her part. That was what the hospital bed had given her, not just time to evaluate him, time to evaluate herself. In the second week of December, Walter Okafor called again. He called every 2 weeks, which she had not expected and had come to look forward to in a way that surprised her. He was 78 years old and had the particular gift of certain older men, the gift of knowing how to be present in a conversation without filling it of saying the thing that needed saying and then going quiet and letting it settle. "How are the ribs?" he asked. "Almost normal," she said. "Good." A pause. "My daughter has finalized the venue for the wedding. April 19th. I would very much like you to come." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Okafor, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said. "I want to. There is a difference. I have found at my age that the things worth doing are almost entirely in the want to category." A pause. "My daughter wants to meet you. She says you are her hero." "I pushed you sideways at a charity event," Vivian said. "You kept her father alive," he said simply. "She is not exaggerating the significance." Vivian smiled. "I'll be there." After she hung up, she sat for a moment in the quiet of her office at the foundation, a small room with a desk and 2 chairs and a whiteboard covered in the names of families and the status of their applications. A room that looked nothing like the offices she had occupied during the years of being Adrian Whitmore's wife. No view, no prestige address, just work visibly accumulated on every surface. She loved this room. She loved it in the way she loved her apartment and her morning coffee, and Walter Okafor's fortnightly calls, and the particular feeling of watching a family's application move from pending to approved. The love of things that were genuinely, completely hers. The question she had been sitting with for 6 weeks was whether love of that kind, self-built, self-sustained, asking nothing from anyone, was compatible with letting someone back into the structure. Whether addition was possible without subtraction. Whether she could remain entirely herself and also allow for, she didn't have a clean word for it, a return, a rebuilding, a different version of something that had existed before. She didn't have the answer, but she was getting closer. Margaret knocked on her office door at 3 in the afternoon with a folder of board materials and an expression that meant she had something to say that wasn't in the folder. "Sit down," Vivian said. Margaret sat. Set this folder on the desk between them. Did not open it. "He came to the volunteer orientation last Tuesday," she said. Vivian looked up. "What?" Adrian, he called me 3 weeks ago and asked if the foundation had any need for volunteers. Not donors, not advisors, volunteers. Margaret's voice was carefully neutral. I told him we did. He came to the orientation session last Tuesday, 7 in the morning. He sat in the back row with 11 other volunteers, most of whom are retired school teachers, and one of whom is a 22-year-old graduate student. Vivian stared at her. He didn't tell you, Margaret said. Not a question. No. He specifically asked me not to. Margaret folded her hands on the folder. He said, and I wrote this down because I wanted to remember it exactly, he said. I'm not doing this so she knows about it. I'm doing it because it matters. If she finds out, that's fine, but please don't tell her. The office was very quiet. Why are you telling me? Vivian asked. Because I'm 71 years old, Margaret said, and I have watched a lot of people do a lot of things in this work, and I have developed a reasonably reliable sense of who is performing goodness and who is actually practicing it. She looked at Vivian directly. He mopped a floor last Tuesday, Vivian, a literal floor, in the community center on Alderman Street, with a mop, alongside a retired school teacher named Patricia, who is 73 and very particular about her mopping technique. Despite herself, Vivian felt her breath shift. Something in her chest, something she had been holding carefully in place for weeks, moved. Patricia didn't know who he was, she asked. Patricia has very little interest in business news, Margaret said. She knew him as Adrian, the new volunteer who listened carefully and didn't complain and brought very good coffee for the whole team. A pause. She told me he was nice. Not fancy nice, she said. Just nice. Vivian looked at the whiteboard. The names, the applications, the quiet accumulated work of 2.5 years. What do you want me to say, Margaret? She said softly. Nothing, Margaret said. I'm not asking you to say anything. I'm giving you information. What you do with it is yours. She stood, picked up the folder, set it back down. I'll leave the board materials, but I want to say one thing and then I'll be quiet on the subject forever. Go ahead. I've known you for 8 years. I've watched you build this thing from a spreadsheet and a conviction. I've watched you give and give and give without anyone giving back, and I have never not once seen you ask for anything for yourself. She paused. You teach people that they deserve support. Every family we serve, every person on that whiteboard. You tell them that needing help isn't weakness, and that accepting it isn't failure. She looked at Vivian steadily. I wonder sometimes if you tell yourself the same thing. The words landed in the specific way that true things land, not with noise but with weight. Vivian said nothing. Margaret left. She sat in her office for a long time after. Then she picked up her phone and sent a text to a number she had been composing messages to in her head for 6 weeks without sending any of them. She typed, Margaret told me about the orientation. She sent it before she could decide not to. His response came in 40 seconds. I asked her not to. She typed, I know, she's 71 and she does what she thinks is right. A pause. Then, I respect that about her. Another pause. Then from her, Patricia says you're nice. She watched the 3 dots appear, disappear, appear again. Then, Patricia is an excellent judge of character and also significantly better with a mop than I am. She looked at that message for a long time. Then she typed, I need to ask you something. Okay. Why the volunteer work, honestly? Not the answer that sounds right, the actual reason. The 3 dots appeared and stayed for almost a full minute. She watched them, didn't look away. Then, because I have spent 15 years in rooms where I was the most important person, where everything organized around me, where my name was on things and my face was in photographs and people competed for my attention, and I believed that was who I was. A pause. Then, Patricia doesn't know my name. She knows I show up on time and I do what I'm asked and I brought good coffee. That's all I am to her. And standing in that community center last Tuesday morning being exactly and only that I felt more like myself than I have in years. Vivian read it twice. Then she called him. He answered immediately. I want to meet, she said. Not at a restaurant. Not somewhere that requires a reservation. Somewhere real. A beat. When? Saturday, the community center on Alderman Street, noon. A pause. You want to meet at the volunteer site? I want to see what you're actually doing, she said. I want to see it with my own eyes, not through Margaret, not through Patricia, mine. Okay, he said. His voice was quiet and completely steady. "I'll be there." She arrived at 11:58, not early enough to be anxious, not late enough to be making a point. Howe was already there. Of course he was. He was standing near the entrance talking to a man she recognized as one of the regular volunteers, a retired postal worker named Dennis, who had been with the foundation for 4 years and had the specific no-nonsense quality of someone who had spent decades delivering things to people regardless of conditions. Adrian was listening to Dennis, not performing listening, actually listening the way people listen when they are genuinely interested with their whole body, slightly oriented toward the other person, without checking their phone or scanning for something more important. He saw her when she walked in. Something crossed his face, not surprise he'd known she was coming, but the particular quality of a person bracing for something that matters, the effort to stay steady when steadiness is what is needed. Dennis noticed where Adrian's eyes had gone and turned around. "Ms. Caldwell," he said warmly, "you should see what your new volunteer did to the storage room last week. Best organization system we've had in 12 years. "I'll take a look," she said. Dennis moved off to find something that needed doing with the instinct of a man who understood when two people needed a moment. She and Adrian stood 3 feet apart in the community center on Alderman Street on a Saturday in December, and neither of them said anything for a moment. He looked different. She had noticed it at the hospital and filed it away, but it was more visible now in this context, less polished. Not careless. He had never been careless, but something had come out from underneath the polish, something that looked like his actual face. "You organized the storage room," she said. "The filing system was from 2009, he said. It was causing Patricia genuine distress. And this bothered you. She's 73, and she's been showing up every week for 4 years. The least I could do was make sure she could find things." Vivian looked at him. "Adrian," she said, "what are you doing? Not here. In general. What is this? What are you actually trying to build?" He didn't answer immediately. She could see him considering, not calculating, genuinely considering. "I'm trying to become someone I'm not ashamed of," he said finally. "Not for you, not for the press or the company or the board, for myself. Because I looked at my life from the outside for the first time in 15 years, and I didn't like what I saw." He paused. "And because the person standing in front of me right now has spent 2.5 years building something genuinely good, and the person I was for most of our marriage didn't deserve to be near that. I'm trying to become someone who does." Vivian held his gaze. "Do you understand," she said, "what it would actually mean if I let you back in? Not to our old life, that life is over, but to something. Whatever would come next." She paused. "It would be slower, harder. You don't get to move at your pace. You don't get to decide you've arrived and stop. It would be daily, without announcements, without milestones you can put in a press release." "I know," he said. "I'm not the woman I was at 30, she said. "I'm harder in some ways, less willing to absorb things I shouldn't have to absorb." "Good," he said immediately. "That's good. I don't want the version of you that absorbed things quietly. I want the version who calls me about grant applications and tells me to fix things and says I'm not finished when she has more to say." Something cracked open in her chest, not dramatically, just a seam releasing. "You broke something," she said, "between us, something real. I need you to understand that it's not fully fixable. There are things that happened that will always have happened, that don't go away because you mopped a floor." "I know that," he said. His voice was steady and completely without defense. "I'm not asking for them to go away. I'm asking for the chance to build something alongside the thing that broke, not instead of it, alongside it." She was quiet for a long moment. Patricia appeared from around the corner with a mop and the energy of a woman with places to be and things to clean. "Oh, Vivian," she said as if they were old friends, which in some sense they now were. "You're here. Good. Did Adrian tell you about the storage room? He did a wonderful job. He was very thorough." She looked at Adrian approvingly. "He didn't complain once." "I heard," Vivian said. "He's a good one," Patricia said, and moved on with her mop before anyone could respond with the magnificent indifference of a woman who had said what needed saying and had floors to attend to. Adrian looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Adrian. And then for the first time in a very long time she laughed, a real laugh. The kind that wasn't suppressed or managed or offered with careful calculation. It cost her nothing, and gave her something she hadn't known she was missing. He laughed too. It came out of him like something that had been held under pressure, warm and real and entirely without performance. They stood in a community center on Alderman Street, laughing at something a 73-year-old woman had said with a mop, and it was the most honest moment they had shared in years. When it settled, the air between them was different. Not resolved, not simple, but different. "I'm not saying yes," Vivian said. "To whatever the question is, I'm not there. I know. But I'm saying," she paused, finding the word, "I'm saying that I'm still asking the question, which is more than I was doing 6 weeks ago." He nodded slowly. "That's everything," he said quietly. "That's more than I expected." "Don't set low expectations," she said. "I never did. That was never my problem." "No," he agreed. "It was always mine." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she said, "Show me the storage room." He showed her the storage room. It was, as Patricia had indicated, very well organized, color-coded, labeled, a clear system for intake and output of supplies, cross-referenced with a simple log that anyone could follow. "This took you all of last Tuesday," she said. "Most of it," he said. Dennis helped with the heavy shelving. She ran her hand along one of the organized shelves, felt the solidity of it, something built carefully, built to last built, so that the next person who needed something would be able to find it without confusion. Small, practical, invisible, entirely useful. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I see what you're doing." She turned to look at him. "And I see that you mean it. I'm not ready to trust it completely yet, but I see it." He said nothing. He just looked at her with the expression of a man who has been handed more than he expected and is being careful not to drop it. "Come to the board meeting Thursday," she said, "not as a donor, as a volunteer who has been here long enough to have a perspective on operations. Margaret will introduce you to the board. They'll ask you questions. Some of them will be suspicious of you because your last name is on a plaque by the hospital entrance, and we are not a plaque kind of organization." "I know. Answer them honestly. Don't manage them. Don't network. Just answer their questions." "Yes. And if the board decides after the meeting that your involvement isn't right for the Foundation's identity, I need you to accept that without argument." He met her eyes. "Without argument," he agreed. She picked up her coat from the chair where she'd set it. "I'm going to see Dennis before I leave," she said. "I need to talk to him about the January program schedule." She started walking, then stopped, turned back. "Adrian." "Yes." "The storage room is good work," she said. "Genuinely. Patricia was right." She walked out before he could respond. But she heard him just behind her exhale long and slow, and all the way through the exhale of a man who has been holding his breath for a long time and has finally been told he is allowed to breathe. The board meeting happened on Thursday. The board had 7 members. 4 of them knew Adrian's name, and 2 of those 4 were openly skeptical. One of them, a woman named Dr. Renata Osei, who ran a pediatric clinic in the South Side and had the specific moral authority of someone who did hard work in hard conditions, asked him directly in front of everyone why he was there. He said, "Because I spent 15 years believing that the measure of a person was what they built, and how big it was, and how many people knew about it. And I was wrong. And this organization is the most concrete proof of that I have ever encountered, because it was built by someone who understood from the beginning that the measure of a person is what they build for other people quietly, without waiting for anyone to notice." A pause. "I'm here because I want to learn how to do that, and because the work needs people willing to show up, and I am willing to show up." Dr. Osei looked at him for a long moment. "Can you sort donation intake records?" she asked. "I can learn," he said. "Good enough," she said, and moved on to the next agenda item. He was approved by 5 votes to 2. The 2 dissenting votes were noted, respected, and filed. Vivian thanked them for their candor and meant it. Afterward in the hallway, Margaret fell into step beside Adrian. "Well," she said. "Well," he agreed. "Dr. Osei doesn't approve of very many people," Margaret said. "I noticed. The fact that she gave you a task rather than a lecture means she's decided to give you a chance." Margaret paused. "Don't waste it." "I won't," he said. He looked down the hallway to where Vivian was talking to 2 board members, her good posture restored now that the collarbone had healed her hands, moving in the particular way they moved when she was engaged, and thinking one of the 10,000 small physical things about her that he had stopped seeing and was now seeing again, as if for the first time. "Can I ask you something?" he said to Margaret. "You can ask." Is she going to be okay? Whatever happens with us, is she going to be okay? Margaret looked at him with the expression that contained 40 years of watching people. She was okay before you, she said. She was okay without you. She'll be okay regardless. A pause. The question you should be asking is whether you're going to be okay, because she has never been the fragile one in this story. He held that for a moment. No, he said. She hasn't. Get good at the donation intake records, Margaret said, and walked away. Vivian saw him as the group dispersed. She walked toward him with the easy confidence that had always been hers, not performed just the natural bearing of a woman who knew exactly who she was. Thursday worked, she said. Yes. The intake records need work, she said. Dr. Osei will send you the file format Friday. I'll be ready. She looked at him. The hallway was emptying. The building was settling into the particular quiet of a weekday evening. My grandmother, she said, used to say something I never fully understood when I was young. She said, the river doesn't go back, but it always finds the sea. She paused. I used to think that was a sad thing, about loss, about things that can't be undone. And now, he asked. Now I think it's about direction, she said. Not the specific path, just the direction, forward, toward something real. She held his gaze. We can't go back to what we were. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the direction can still be right. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully, Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I'm willing to find out, she said. Day by day, no guarantees, no contract, no name on a plaque, just showing up and finding out. He nodded, once, slowly. I can do that. I know you can, she said. That's why I'm saying it. She picked up her bag, moved toward the door. He fell into step beside her. Not close. The right distance. The distance of two people who are beginning something, not reclaiming something, and understand the difference. They walked out into the December evening. The city was doing what Chicago does in December, full and cold and entirely alive, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in its streets, while also being somehow the perfect backdrop for all of them. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment. I'll see you Saturday, she said. Patricia has a system for the front hall that she wants help implementing. I'll be there, he said. She nodded, started to walk. Vivian, she turned. He stood on the sidewalk in the December cold, the man who had sold a monument to himself and come to mop floors and organize storage rooms and sit in the back row of volunteer orientations with retired school teachers. And he looked at her the way he had forgotten how to look at her for years, directly without agenda, with the simple and complete attention of a man who finally understood what was standing in front of him. Thank you, he said, for the note, for not giving up on the possibility, for being exactly who you are even when I didn't see it. She looked at him for a long moment. Don't thank me yet, she said. Thank me in a year, when you've had 12 months of doing the invisible work and nobody has written a profile about you and your name isn't on anything. Thank me then if you still mean it. I'll mean it, he said. I know, she said. That's the whole thing, Adrian. That's the only thing. She turned and walked into the city, and Adrian Whitmore stood on a sidewalk in December and watched her go. Not with the loss of someone being left, but with the certainty of a man who finally knew, without a deal to close or a headline to generate or a plaque to hang, exactly where he needed to be and exactly what it was going to take to deserve it. He had been a billionaire who thought he owned the city. I was learning to be a man who showed up on Saturday mornings with good coffee and did what was asked of him, and earned slowly and without announcement the right to stand near something real. That was enough. That was, it turned out, everything.